Futurama comic, issue 24. Bender tries to play cards with Fry when he's asleep and tries to take a lot of his money, but thankfully Leela smacks him and tells him off. Too bad we don't even see her fist impact him. His robotic eyes fly out, which is so gruesome to say. And he just thanks Leela because he sees a quarter under the table as a result. And I have to assume his eyes are sending the signals to his brain wirelessly. It turns out that for some reason the fridge and mixer are sentient when that wouldn't benefit anyone, and they even have paychecks. And one is a wife. Bender goes to the professor's workbench, ignoring its sign telling him not to, and it cuts ahead to him saying to the what-if machine that's now a robot that he stole spare parts from the workbench to make him how he is. Still, it should have been explained that he downloaded how to make a sentient robot into his brain. And I have to assume Leela's too scared of retaliation from Bender to tell on him right away and prevent things from getting to this point. Bender was a jerk and stole Fry's wallet, and when he wakes up, Bender goes from liking the mean robot to hating him because he has a full house. Fry complains that he lost his favorite jacket and his dad got it for him every year when he was a kid. He hated shopping so much that when Fry was born he bought 18 of those jackets to give him a new one every Christmas, even if he couldn't fit in it. He still wouldn't have said that because it's not like he literally got him the same jacket every year, it was still a different jacket. He says that back then Christmas was special, and by that he must mean good, since it's still special, just awful now. Because of this, he says that when he was a kid, he used to wonder what if it was Christmas every day. But it'd be immediately obvious what that'd be like. His parents would quickly run out of gift money, so most of the time it wouldn't be anything special. It would just be another day where there's holiday decorations all over the place. The what-if machine's programming forces him to show Fry what it'd be like if every day was Xmas. We see Nixon's head in a jar on Robot Santa's lap, and somehow Robot Santa's nice enough to ask him what he wants for Xmas, so he's not himself. And neither is Nixon because he says he wants world peace, even if it's forced by Earth's military. That's the only way it'd happen. Robot Santa says he'll grant him his wish. Why would he do anything for anyone? This is a glitchy robot, and he would have been interrupted and told that Robot Santa isn't like that. Farnsworth says that his crew usually has klutzy accidents when decorating the Xmas tree, and the tree falls into Zoidberg. At least Amy cares enough to apologize to him. But it's been a constant theme that the crew don't care about him, so that's inaccurate too. Zoidberg says he's fine because the tree missed his heart, but it still hit some vital organ. Nixon tells Fry in a broadcast that he's going to introduce his new Secretary of Earth Defense, which is somehow the evil Robot Santa. Won't he hate him? Anyways, Robot Santa's going to get rid of all the nuclear missiles. So, this scenario is based on an idiot ball. Or if he's always friendly with Robot Santa based on how casually he made a deal with him in an earlier story, then why didn't this really happen? What took so long? Farnsworth is smart enough to be suspicious right away, and Bender says his sensors say they're all armed to explode, and Fry wonders what'll happen when all of the missiles will blow up at the same time. And Farnsworth says permanent nuclear winter. They won't still be alive. You'd think at the very least they'd all be mutants. It at least tries to have a joke, because it turns out he waited 2 days to tell him the answer. But even that doesn't make sense. What does any of this scenario have to do with Xmas being every day? We'd just imagine that it'd be like the Xmas episode where they're in hiding, but every day. A kid somehow wants to catch a nuclear snowflake on his tongue, and I don't want to see how horrible he looks right afterwards. The sewer mutant seeing this just says that she's seen worse, but I don't see how. Everyone's going to be drafted into Santa's army, which expects everyone to build weapons of mass destruction. But how could most people be capable of building that kind of technical stuff? Let alone by hand in front of conveyor belts. It'd be more efficient for them to build robots to do that. They wouldn't need to go to the bathroom for one. Leela gets told why Robot Santa's doing this. He wants to conquer the universe in one night. I thought he only wanted to punish the naughty, not deal with mountains of paperwork running every country. Nixon explains that Robot Santa made him the leader of Earth for life, so he thinks they'll rule together. So he believed he would get what he wants because he was desperate to think he wasn't lying. But then Robot Santa stomps him to death, thankfully without us seeing it. And this is the first thing to make sense in this scenario. Nixon wouldn't trust him in the first place. Nobody would, because this is a robot that terrorized everybody, and would have no reason to give anyone what they want. People make snow angels, which are creatively used as molds for an evil angel army. Or he could make robots for an army. And Fry somehow can't hear Layla because his ear is broken. He's wearing ears that replace his ears. Why? Layla says she's planning a rebellion and is told she'll get a life working in the mincemeat mines, but agrees to stick with her. I thought Layla was more careful because she's the nag of the team. But she's also the cool, brave one who can fight, so it makes sense at first. But you'd think it'd be Farnsworth who'd make the plan first, because he's a genius, and he doesn't care what happens. Gee, I wonder if the plan will go wrong. Layla says she'll plan a rebellion right in front of other people. Says that she's been stealing metal from the weapons factory and sneaking it to the professor to make a giant robot Easter bunny. And then it turns out Farnsworth betrayed his crew. No, not even just to benefit himself, because he's evil, but instead it's because he somehow doesn't know that Robot Santa is the bad guy. I think Bender messed with the what-if machine's brain. What's the point of the what-if machine if he won't actually show them how the scenarios would go? This is the only remotely logical way that there would be Xmas every day, that it was forced on them all. But why doesn't Robot Santa terrorize them every day regardless instead of needing Nixon to be gullible? Maybe it was explained in the show, because that's a big plot hole otherwise. I guess he's such a slave to his programming that he can't choose to bother them on a day other than Christmas in the way he does. The giant statue of Robot Santa was a robot that flies after the Easter Bunny mecha after the heroes get into it. It deploys explosive eggs while getting Christmas trees fired at them. So they're still called Christmas trees even on Xmas? Fry clearly didn't mean what if every day was Xmas in the future, so he was probably too curious about what the simulation would be like to immediately clarify this and get it to stop. The chicks of death don't look like chicks at all, and the Robot Santa gets burned by napalm marshmallows. And somehow, Fry can see Amy being held captive by Robot Santa in the cockpit, even though he's really far away from it. If we can't see Amy, how could he? Fry says he has one last wish and tells them to let Amy be the one who destroys us. Layla wonders what he's doing. A smart last-ditch effort to get Amy's help, which is clearly the only option. She somehow trips and accidentally hits the button to self-destruct the mecha, which I assume was put there as a last-ditch attack of the mechas. It'd look more heroic of her if she intentionally hit the button. The what-if machine then lies to her that she survives this somehow and gets the key to the city. Somehow, despite Layla being curious and wanting her questions answered, Bender's interruption causes her to leave the room, instead of his question causing the what-if machine to show a scenario where she left the room. Fry wonders what if his life was more like one of the sitcoms he watched as a kid, because he's tired of the future's alien invasions. Despite him clearly implying that he wants to see a normal life, of all the sitcoms that the what-if machine rips off, it chooses I Dream of Jeannie, and has Leela be the genie. Because the what-if machine's lazy. And there's a sadistic yank the dog's chain moment, where she unnecessarily says she'll date whoever frees her, but then says to Fry that she just wants to be friends, and he's totally cheerful and fine with that. If this was the first time he ever saw her, he'd have some kind of reaction to her having only one eye. He's an astronaut, and it's because he got the space chimp drunk, and somehow they decided to make Fry's replacement. When clearly if they were going to send a chimp to space, it was going to be to test how that affect chimp biology. This is probably just ridiculous on purpose to make fun of bad sitcom writing. Leela talks as if genies can choose not to serve specific people if they go back into their bottle, and she breaks the bottle by accident. She blinks to use magic, which is creative and takes advantage of her being a Cyclops. She did this ungrateful punishment for his generous offer as a warning to not try any funny business with her, or he'll always be a bronc. And he just thinks it's cool and wants to be a dinosaur next. So that's how I'd react to Sabrina. This really makes me wish I saw I Dream of Jeannie. But I wouldn't imagine a genie to be able to say no when someone wishes that they could date them. Fry admits that his house is all he could afford on a janitor's salary, and he's living with Bender, even though he's in the present day. And he somehow says that he thought Bender was a robot too until his doctor told him that was crazy. For no reason, considering that his doctor is somehow Zoidberg. It turns out this Bender was made by the government. In present day, Fry is given pills on a regular basis to become wrong about Bender and Zoidberg. That's too dark. Why are these two here? The what-if machine's a lazy writer. Zoidberg thinks he can erase memories, but he just uses a pen. And Fry tries to find Leela a new modern bottle, and she doesn't like any of them. And eventually she likes a wine bottle that smells nice to her, even though Leela's not known for liking wine. I don't remember the normal Leela acting like she hates the smell of wine. Confusingly, Leela has a date with a leprechaun, and he has to scare kids away with a summoned tiger. Then Fry wishes for a girlfriend, is at least smart enough to think this might be a genie that won't give him what he really wants. And Amy shows up at his door and she's a witch here, because we needed more contrivance. She could have just been a normal woman who was summoned to go here. He's intimidated, and Amy thinks Leela's Fry's mother, and they insult each other, wasting time. She must have just said she was Fry's mother to insult her, and not really meant it, because she's clearly got one eye. So Leela tries to cast a spell on her, and she ducks, and it transforms Zoidberg. And somehow Leela survives an anvil landing on her. Leela summons a little plane sending a bomb at her, and somehow they're still fighting later as giants, when you'd think they'd have easily used one of their powers to defeat the other by now. Because Leela can turn someone into a frog, but she must have just dodged all of her transformation spell beams. They must be really good at dodging magic beams. Somehow Fry's smiling even though their fighting could destroy the world because he likes that they're fighting over him, even though obviously he's not why they're fighting. Wouldn't he just wish that they weren't giant, or were fighting somewhere safe? And sadly the what if scenario ends right there, as if they really did destroy the world. When I would have been fine with seeing a lot more stories where Leela and Amy had magic powers like this. Bender's losing his card game to the what if machine because since he can calculate what every hand will be with perfect accuracy, he's been cheating at the game. It turns out the out of nowhere ethics chip was actually a self-destruct chip, and Farnsworth only labeled it ethics chip because it was out of the self-destruct labels. Then the machine explodes for apparently no reason. Maybe it's just to damage Bender out of exasperation with him. Farnsworth says it'll take a year to rebuild the what if machine and says they'll just have to use the how's about, what's the deal with, and who the hell wants to know machines. Bender somehow bet his sense of humor and lost it. Futurama comic issue 25. For some reason, Bender and Fry are dressed like the main characters in Star Trek, as if it wasn't banned in the future in this universe, which makes more sense than in the show. And Fry's called the captain, and some aliens try to attack their spaceship with hail in space somehow. And they've got a hostage, and the aliens are named after the Beatles. Fry gets told to stop wasting time in the holodeck, and he says they're just trying not to get too bored. Their ship is under attack by fly alien pirates who want to steal their manure when they're trying to deliver it to a farming planet. See, a farming planet could make sense as long as it's not literally the only job there is, because farming is a very common and vital job, especially in ancient times. And they didn't actually say that literally every part of the planet was a farm, including the poles. And the manure gets sent out of their ship when it smacks into a rock, and the aliens are still following them because they're flies. Leela has an idea and knocks the aliens into a web that was conveniently in space, and that wrecked their last thruster, and the ship crashes into a planet, but it must have had somewhat of a smooth landing, or at least the main characters must have been tightly secured somehow. Because why wouldn't they all die anytime their spaceship crashes? They need to cool down the ship because it's burning up in the atmosphere first. So Fry gets an idea to open all of Bender's portable beer fridges. The ship lands in water on a planet with both humans and robots that still talk like old-fashioned farmers. And somehow they dine on cyborg pigs. Somehow Bender's able to eat the robotic parts of it. I guess robots could burn anything for fuel. Even metal? The taxman shows up and demands their home and food because their taxes were paid early, which makes no sense. And a bad guy cat shows up to literally hit the farmer with 9 tails. Thankfully, Leela kicks him, and he's actually cowardly enough to run away, conveniently. Also, there isn't really a prophecy about a hero from the stars, which is more likely. Instead, the guy just couldn't read. He wouldn't think that sign said that. Even though the farmers are going to have to deal with the taxman coming back and taking them to prison, Leela just wants her friends to gather food while she'll try to get the ship out of this planet. To be fair, even if they got rid of the sheriff, his replacement would be even worse, just as evil with no experience. Still, I'd expect Leela to be sad and act like she cares that these farmers are in an unfair predicament and she can do nothing to help. This is like Rick and Morty if there wasn't Morty there. So there's no protagonist who's relatable by actually caring. Bender says pickpocketing Fry is no challenge, which gives him an excuse to mention the baby he took candy from and take it out of his chest compartment. And he makes it cry because he wants to attract someone to rob, but that ends up being pointless because it cuts ahead in time to him easily seeing a bunch of people who aren't rushing towards him from hearing a baby. So I don't want to think about what happened to that baby. That wasn't funny. He's mad that none of the peasants have money to pickpocket, and it turns out the king before the sheriff wasn't considered to be evil. It's pretty unorthodox to put a sheriff in charge. I guess the king had no heirs, but I'd still expect the ownership of the kingdom to transfer to another kingdom's royalty before a sheriff. This is probably just ripping off the same story Robbo Hedge ripped off. It's interesting that there's a wormhole shortcut to the palace in a world full of traditional farmers and ranchers with a castle. Bender robs a taxman and trips on a rock and accidentally drops the money down a cliff, returning the tax money to the poor. And it is more plausible that Robin Hood would end up doing that by accident, if he's already inconsiderate enough to be fine with stealing, even though it upset the taxman. I wish I knew where Bender's Robin Hood outfit came from, or where Fry's new outfit came from. I like that he's horrified that Bender made him look like a friar and told him he doesn't want anything to do with this. Can't help but be disappointed that the story is just ripping off Robin Hood. Sort of the whole appeal to seeing them on alien planets is seeing something new. Or at least really weird. Then he gets shown a bunch of food he stole and agrees to join him. Eventually, Leela hires Yoda to raise her ship out of the lake with a remote-controlled giant magnet in exchange for money. Leela's out of money and needs a lot of parts to repair the ship, which is a great excuse for the heroes to have to stay on a planet because they need money. Leela smartly agrees to let Bender steal from the rich because it's the quickest option to escape that terrible planet. Zoidberg getting here isn't explained properly. I just have to assume he used the same spaceship he was shown to have on the vampire planet in an earlier issue. It makes sense to have the guy who annoyingly insists on singing with them be Zoidberg. Bender shouldn't be written to talk because those rich people should have heard him and looked at him, and run away to report him. Instead he misses with the arrow since he's new at aiming the bow, which is more realistic. And he hits Scrooge McDuck, getting money anyways. And he disappoints the poor by barely giving them any of his money. Some robots want to join them, and they look sad until Bender offers them some Mary chips left over from the last rave he went to. And Fry thankfully says they creep him out for laughing at everything. Leela's told by one of the new robots that the sheriff has the best stocked garage, so she agrees to go there. Bender says later that night that every night at this time, the sheriff and his guards walk his virtual video game dog. And fortunately, he explains how he knows that. He read his blog. So the garage is conveniently left unguarded to be stolen from. Fry being sick from eating bad lard is actually used, unfortunately. And Zoidberg's singing gets the attention of the evil sheriff, and when the bad guys find a bow, they decide to hold a tournament to find the greatest archer to lure the archer there. Bender gets an email and prints out paper from his mouth to find out about the tournament. Leela says it's a trap, but it's so predictable that Bender will insist on going to the tournament anyways, despite her very good reasoning, so I wish to just cut the Bender at the tournament instead of all this padding. With not enough creativity, it's not a very impressive plot. It's easy to put robots in the plot of Robin Hood, especially when it barely makes a difference in the story. They could have replaced the virtual dog with the regular dog. We didn't need all those panels where we find out the losing archers are getting their taxes doubled because the sheriff's greedy. Bender's in a cloak with gloves hiding his identity, which is surprisingly smart, and he shoots an arrow and causes an explosion which creates a huge hole because he split the center atom of the arrow. That makes no sense. You'd think if he split an atom to cause that explosion, everyone would die, or at least have a much shorter life. The protagonists are about to be hanged, and somehow they all look completely calm. Out of nowhere, it turns out the king's still alive, and was just on a trip telling people about his new operating systems. Why? It'd actually make more sense if he was simply on a business trip. His spyware detected the bulk email sent to Bender, so he wanted to see who he was setting a trap for, and he easily tells off the sheriff because he corrupted every law he stood for. I have to assume he was told about how the sheriff ran things off screen. But in a world with robots and email, wouldn't he have found out how he was running things earlier? So he easily has the sheriff sent to a horrible cell without windows, and decides to make it up to the protagonist with a feast in their honor. Zoidberg wants to sing again, and we see Zoidberg tied up above a group feast with another cyborg for some reason. Why didn't Bender attack Zoidberg right away the first time he tried to sing? He's not a polite person. There's two stories in this issue. Both of them had the what-if scenario machine be impossibly bad at its job. The first one had the what-if scenario where Nixon somehow believes Robot Santa when he says that he'll let him rule the world if he makes a deal with him. So Robot Santa says on TV that he'll get rid of every nuke, and that leads to them all being used in creating nuclear winter, which somehow doesn't kill everyone or give them noticeable health effects. And instead Robot Santa tries to enslave everyone into somehow building weapons for him and working his army. So the whole plot only happens because of an idiot ball on the part of the president of a country that was constantly terrorized by that robot. So that was kinda confusing, but it was interesting to see how competent Robot Santa was and see him doing something different. But since when does he want to rule the universe? I thought he does what he does because he's a slave to his programming. When Fry wondered what it'd be like if every day was Christmas, clearly he was talking about the Christmas of the 21st century. And the second story shows off Leela if she was a genie, ripping off I Dream of Jeannie of all things, even though Fry said he was tired of how life was in the future with aliens everywhere. So clearly he wanted to see a normal sitcom. Not a sitcom where he was still around Zoidberg. It was fun to see Leela and Amy as a genie and witch though, but it once again had me deal with Amy's forced cattiness against Leela. It never made any sense to me. It's not like they're fighting over a guy. I would be fine with seeing a lot more stories with this concept. It was creative that Leela agreed to be in a wine bottle because she broke her real bottle. This story was an underwhelming, lazy ripoff of Robin Hood after the crew landed on the planet. And because their ship needed repairs, it made sense that they needed to let Bender steal from taxmen. It doesn't take much effort to have robots in the story of Robin Hood. I was impressed by any originality there was, like Bender getting an email and printing it out, and the sheriff having a blog where he posted that he has his Tamagotchi dog walked. But they could have replaced the modern technology there with old technology just fine. And they went through a wormhole portal. Also, Yoda was there for no reason because it was a bog, and he thankfully used a big magnet to get the ship out of the lake instead of the Force. So that was a twist, and another way it took advantage of the planet having some good technology. I have to wonder why a world with this technology had the king be totally oblivious of how bad the sheriff was until he found out about his email to Bender, which he could have only done with spyware, so at least it matters that he used email. And then he came back to save the heroes from him. It was also very lucky that the place even had a good, non-greedy king at all. While I want to believe there's been good absolute monarchs in the past that wouldn't be as greedy as possible, it just doesn't seem realistic that there'd be a good king who would save the protagonist instead of wanting the money the taxmen got and putting them to death anyways because they still broke laws in his kingdom by robbing people. But I'm willing to believe that it's sort of believable because this is also a world with great technology. So it's ahead in time from a normal medieval society, so maybe the kings aren't so bad now. But royalty is only not so bad now when they're in a constitutional monarchy, where the power is limited so it can't go to their heads as much, and that's not the case here. It feels like more of a void of a story when it's based on an existing property,